Texas, 1943. The moment the German prisoners set foot on the Mexia station platform, they were immediately struck by a sight that felt almost unreal. At 10 p.m. the entire city was glowing as brightly as daytime. None of them could believe what they were seeing. In Germany, every city was drowned in thick darkness because of blackout orders. Nighttime was when people vanished from the streets, leaving only shadows, silence, and the fear of Allied bombs. But here, on American soil, light poured from houses, shops, street lamps, and factories. Everything shone as if the war belonged to some faraway world. Many prisoners stood frozen. One sergeant whispered, "Impossible, they don't turn off the lights." But the shock didn't end there. Before reaching Texas, many of them were mentally prepared to be shoved into livestock cars, just as they themselves had done to Soviet prisoners. Yet the train they stepped off was a clean passenger coach, cushioned seats, clear windows, a level of decency they had never experienced during the war. As they entered Mexia, the entire town came out to look, not to insult, not to throw stones, but out of curiosity, because no one had ever seen so many German soldiers at once. People stared, spoke quietly among themselves, but there was no hatred. And on that very night, under the glaring electric lights and the calm American faces, many German prisoners began to feel something heavy sink into their chest. If this was truly America, then everything the Nazi regime had told them might have been nothing but a colossal lie. It was the moment when their belief first began to crack. A shock, one that would only be the first. Summer 1943, North Africa collapsed. Within weeks, the entire German-Italian force in Tunisia was forced to surrender. From 250,000 to 275,000 soldiers were captured, marking one of the greatest Axis defeats in the war. But what stunned them was not the defeat. It was how the Americans treated them afterward. Once gathered at the processing centers, prisoners were put through a system many described as frighteningly efficient. The Americans photographed each man, conducted medical checks, completed documents, classified them, then sent them to holding areas. Faster and more organized than anything they had seen in the German military. One German sergeant later said, "We never imagined Americans could organize things with the precision of a Swiss watch." But the greatest shock came from the food. After months in the desert, starving, dehydrated, reduced to half rations, the prisoners were handed meals with meat, coffee, fresh vegetables, and white bread. Many of them looked at each other, unable to believe these were meals for prisoners. White bread, something even German soldiers back home rarely ate. Coffee, an item so scarce that German commanders replaced it with horse coffee. Some Italian soldiers cried at the sight of the food. One man said, "What were we fighting for, when even the enemy treats us better than our own commanders?" From that moment, a heavy question settled in many hearts. If America could care for hundreds of thousands of prisoners better than Germany cared for its own men, then who was truly stronger? It was the first moment of the American shock, the first hammer blow to their faith in Nazism. Aboard the Liberty ship crossing the Atlantic, German prisoners faced a truth they had never imagined. America was not just powerful, it was abundant to a terrifying degree. On the very first day, they watched American sailors throw away more food than a German unit received in a week. Trays of leftover meat, vegetables, bread, and coffee were discarded as if they were worthless. For soldiers who had fought half dead in Africa, living on rations barely enough to survive, the sight felt unbearable. A prisoner whispered, "We are fighting a country whose trash is richer than our meals." But there was more. They learned that America had built 2,710 Liberty ships in just a few years. Each ship assembled from 250,000 parts produced in 32 states. This mass production capability surpassed anything German officers had ever imagined. In Germany, building a warship required enormous time and resources. In America, Liberty ships were produced like automobiles. When allowed to see the ship's radar system, the prisoners were stunned yet again. The radar that Americans considered standard equipment was more common and more stable than the technology Germany believed it monopolized. One officer couldn't stop himself from saying, "If this is their basic technology, how powerful is their secret technology?" Crossing the Atlantic, they were not just leaving Africa, they were leaving behind the illusion that Nazi Germany could ever defeat the United States. That voyage became the awakening of thousands of prisoners, and the shock had only just begun. When the Liberty ship docked at Norfolk, Virginia, many German prisoners believed they had already seen the limits of America's wealth and power during the long Atlantic crossing. But the moment they stepped ashore, they realized everything they had witnessed before was only the beginning. Before them stood an enormous seaport, operating at a speed they had never imagined. Steel cranes lifted cargo non-stop, like machines that never grew tired. Crates and containers were unloaded, transferred, and reloaded with the precision of an industrial assembly line stretching all the way to the horizon. One German officer froze and whispered, "One day here equals a whole week in Hamburg." And it wasn't an exaggeration. Norfolk handled more cargo in 24 hours than Hamburg, Germany's largest port, could manage in an entire week. The difference wasn't just large, it defied imagination. But what shocked the prisoners the most was the parking lot. Right outside the port gates, hundreds of automobiles were lined up, cars belonging to workers, not officers or the wealthy. To Germans in 1943, a car was such a luxury that a family would have to save for years to even dream of owning one. In Nazi Germany, cars were symbols of the elite. In America, they were simply daily transportation. A German soldier clenched his jaw and muttered, "Our soldiers walk, and their workers drive cars." As the prisoners were led deeper into the port, they began to understand a painful truth. They were fighting a nation that not only had a powerful army, but possessed an economy and industrial capacity far beyond anything Europe had ever known. And Norfolk was only one of dozens of similar ports across the United States. In that moment, the belief in victory within many German soldiers' hearts began to tremble once more. The cross-country train journey began in Norfolk, and for thousands of German prisoners it was not just transportation. It was a journey that shattered everything they had believed from Nazi propaganda. From the very first hours as the train sped past the cities of the East Coast, they saw something that had long vanished in Germany: light. Every city, every neighborhood, every farm glowed with illuminated rooms and street lamps, as if the war did not exist. For soldiers accustomed to absolute darkness from blackout orders, the sight felt like another world. They passed factories burning with lights through the night. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. Conveyor belts ran nonstop. Workers operated in bright, well-lit environments full of modern machines, a cruel contrast to Germany's exhausted factories, short on electricity and constantly bombed. Then, when the train stopped at small towns, they witnessed something that left many speechless. Ordinary Americans drinking Coca-Cola, smoking high-quality cigarettes, wearing brand-new leather shoes, luxuries that in Germany were reserved only for officers and the ruling elite. A German corporal gripped the metal bar of the train window and muttered, "Their civilians live better than our officers." But the greatest shock came when they observed the American rail system. Mechanical arms, automated controls, track-switching technology, all operated faster and more precisely than anything they had ever seen in Europe. Just a few workers performed tasks that in Germany required an entire team. And in that moment, one truth hit them hard. America wasn't just richer. America was a generation ahead of Germany in both technology and industry. The train wasn't just transporting prisoners. It was carrying the collapse of illusions they had believed throughout the war. As the train continued westward across the United States, the German prisoners began to see things they never dared to imagine. A massive industrial system operating at a speed and scale beyond and anything in Europe. And these visions made them realize that America was not just strong, America was unbeatable. The first thing that left them speechless was the Alcoa plant, which supplied aluminum for the American aviation industry. As the train passed it, the U.S. and military guide explained, "This factory consumes more electricity in a day than the entire city of Munich." The statement made many prisoners feel as if they couldn't breathe. While Germany had to ration electricity by the hour, cutting energy because of bombings and coal shortages, America possessed a single factory that used the power of an entire city just to produce aluminum. Then, as the train approached Rubbertown, they were introduced to America's synthetic rubber complex. With an output of 800,000 tons per year, the area produced 7 times more rubber than all of Germany combined. This explained why the U.S. Army had endless trucks, jeeps, planes, and tanks, so many that replacing a tire was easier for Americans than replacing shoes for German soldiers. A German officer could only shake his head. We are fighting a country that could manufacture an entire war by itself if it wanted to. But the final shock of the day came as they passed the Ford Willow Run plant, where America produced the B-24 Liberator bombers. There, the assembly line operated non-stop, 24/7, producing one bomber every 63 minutes, a pace the German industry could never match, even if the entire nation mobilized every resource it possessed. In the silent train car, one prisoner whispered, "If they can build planes this fast, how could we ever win?" That was the moment they understood. American industry was the true nightmare of Nazi Germany. In the days that followed, the Mexia camp became a strange new world that Unificia Vera Burkhart had never imagined. Each morning, when the bell rang under the pale Texas sunlight, American guards opened the gates and led the prisoners out to work. What confused him most wasn't the labor. It was the treatment, so drastically different from everything Nazi Germany had taught him. The Americans didn't glare with hatred, didn't kick prisoners in the back, didn't bark insults. They treated prisoners like human beings, a concept that now felt like a fairy tale back home. Burkhart's group was assigned to work on nearby farms. The farm owner, a middle-aged man wearing a worn cowboy hat, looked at them with a mix of caution and friendliness. He explained tasks using simple gestures, sometimes even offering water when the heat became unbearable. Such unexpected kindness made Burkhart wonder more than once, "Is this really my enemy?" But the most shocking thing was the wages. Each day of work earned them 80 cents, a small sum to Americans, yet a fortune to German soldiers accustomed to starvation at the front. Even more surprising, the Americans didn't take the money away. They were allowed to keep it for use in the camp canteen, buying soap, cigarettes, chocolate, and canned food, luxuries that existed only in memory in wartime Germany. Each evening back at the camp, the men whispered excitedly. A new world was unfolding before them, one in which the enemy treated them better than the country they had sworn loyalty to, and Burkhart knew what he was witnessing would forever change the way he saw this war. Nights in Mexia were the moments that left Burkhart the most unsettled. As the blazing Texas sun sank behind the cotton fields, life in the camp became unbelievably peaceful. Too peaceful for prisoners coming straight from the horrors of war. Inside the wooden barracks, German prisoners gathered in small groups. Some played cards, others sang, and many began collecting scrap materials, wood, cloth, tin cans, to create things. What amazed Burkhart was that the Americans didn't forbid it. In fact, guards sometimes smiled when they saw prisoners crafting like skilled artisans. Some carved wood into miniature boats, others built model houses, tanks, even tiny mandolins that could actually play. Materials considered worthless by the Americans became treasures for soldiers who had lost so much. The most talented created artwork from leaves, rope, and cloth, scenes of home, of battlefields, or simple dreams of peace. Burkhart never forgot a friend sitting under a dim yellow lamp, piecing together a wooden house. "This is my home," he whispered, "the place I hope to return to." But the greatest shock was this. The Americans allowed them to sell their handmade items. Local townspeople, even guards or farm owners, bought them for a few dollars, a huge amount for prisoners. The money could be used in the canteen or even sent back to Germany through the Red Cross. Those peaceful Mexia nights, filled with quiet laughter, the tapping of carving tools, and whispered stories, made Burkhart realize something profound. Even in a brutal war, there existed a corner of calm, a place he never believed could be meant for enemies like them. One scorching June morning, while Burkhart and the prisoners worked in the fields, a sudden incident left them frozen. A farmer slipped during the cotton harvest, his leg caught in the sharp rotating machinery. He screamed as blood soaked his pant leg. American guards rushed over, shouting for help, but the first to act were the German prisoners. Without waiting for orders, Burkhart and two others ran forward, shut off the machine, and pulled the injured man free. One prisoner, once a medic in Berlin, tore off his shirt and calmly bandaged the wound with professional skill, leaving the Americans stunned. The farmer, trembling in pain, managed a weak "thank you," a single word that silenced everyone. the story spread quickly through town. The local paper printed, "German POWs saved Texas farmer." People who once viewed the prisoners with fear now saw them differently, not as Nazi monsters, but as tired young men, far from home. The next day, the farm owner brought a large basket of fruit to the camp as thanks. A guard handing it to Burkhart simply said, "You did something not everyone would have done." That moment stayed with Burkhart. In a war defined by hatred, a small act of compassion dissolved the line between enemy and human. And he couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe the world was far bigger than the propaganda he had been forced to believe. As days of labor at farms and factories passed, a quiet but powerful transformation spread across the German POW camps in America. At first it was only a few whispers, but soon it grew into a full intellectual awakening. Men who once believed absolutely in Nazi propaganda began asking questions, and once they started questioning, they could never go back. American camps opened educational programs, English classes, history, economics, even philosophy and journalism. At first, only a few curious prisoners attended, but soon the rooms were full. Reading American newspapers, listening to radio broadcasts, watching Hollywood films, they were shocked to discover that the country Germany portrayed as chaotic and corrupt was actually free, open, and expressive. Burkhart remembered the first time he read a newspaper containing conflicting opinions. In Germany, there was only one voice, the Nazi voice. But in America, newspapers criticized the government, questioned the military, even challenged the president. He was stunned. Freedom wasn't chaos. It was the right to question. Italian POWs who had abandoned fascism shared their stories. Their words struck deep, revealing Nazi promises of victory and glory as nothing more than illusions. By the end of 1943, the truth was undeniable. Germany had already lost, and Nazi ideology was collapsing even within the hearts of the men who once fought for it. In December 1943, as winter chilled Texas, Burkhart expected another bleak Christmas in captivity. He remembered Tunisia. Starvation, artillery every night, homesickness that crushed his spirit. But what happened in America that day became the most emotional shock he and thousands of German prisoners had ever experienced. Early in the morning, U.S. Postal Service trucks lined up outside the camp. Guards called the prisoners together as large packages were carried inside. No one understood what was happening until the bags were opened. Inside were 500,000 Christmas gifts from American citizens: cookies, chocolate, wool socks, tobacco, coffee, scented soap, and handwritten cards from children. "Merry Christmas, even if you're far from home. Hope you are safe." Burkhart stood speechless. Why would the enemy send gifts and such kind messages? That evening, the church in Mexia lit up. Even more astonishing, the American choir sang Christmas carols in German. "Stille Nacht, O Tannenbaum, leise rieselt der Schnee." German prisoners stood quietly by the fence, many with tears in their eyes. They couldn't remember the last time they heard songs from home. The Christmas dinner in the camp was richer than anything many Nazi officers ever received. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, butter, apple pie, and hot coffee. One prisoner whispered, "We're treated better here than at home." That night shattered the last remnants of Nazi belief. They realized, a nation as wealthy, free, and compassionate as America could never be the evil enemy propaganda described. By 1944, German POW camps in the U.S. were nothing like what Burkhart once imagined. What shocked him most wasn't the food or the comfortable living conditions. It was the profound change in the minds of the men who once swore loyalty to the Nazi state. Their rigidity faded, replaced by curiosity, openness, and a hunger for truth. Large-scale educational programs expanded across the camps: English, science, history, agriculture, mechanics. Even university professors came to teach. Participation grew so rapidly that some camps built new study centers. Over 40,000 prisoners enrolled, an unprecedented phenomenon in wartime history. Cultural centers allowed prisoners to read American newspapers from across the country, exploring a world of free information they never knew existed. Movie nights had an equally powerful effect. German soldiers were stunned to see American civilian life, abundant, open, and free, the exact opposite of tightly controlled Germany. Some films even discussed human rights, free speech, democratic elections, concepts they had never been allowed to think about. During evening conversations, Burkhart heard many admit, Germany lost long ago, We just weren't allowed to know. Slowly, the once unshakable faith in Nazism crumbled, replaced by respect for America, a nation most prisoners now viewed as the strongest and most civilized they had ever known.